welcome to the Productivity Podcast. Sue returns to talk about Chapter 5, Is My Leadership Structure Right?, from our book, Every Second Counts. Hi, Sue.
Hi.
So, probably one of the biggest areas of focus, I'd say, from what we're seeing at the moment in terms of leadership structure. Is it right? Clearly having the right local leadership model determines success in a lot of shops or units and shapes the kind of colleague and customer experience. So we'll start with the kind of big question then. How do I know if I've got my leadership structure right?
I always kind of start with the question is kind of, what do you want your leaders to do? So what your leaders to do absolutely needs to tie back to what's your USP as a business, what you're trying to achieve, what you're trying to deliver for customers, because your leaders need to be set up to help deliver that strategy for you. So that's the first thing. It's kind of leadership doesn't exist in isolation. It's how you set yourself up to deliver your strategy. And there's different ways of doing that. And it's important that businesses decide how they want to do it. So for a lot of organisations, the unit manager, whether that's a store, a restaurant, a production line in a factory, a warehouse manager, they're the key person that are making sure things happen the way you want to within the business. And then you get into, what's the support structure below them, if they need one, within that unit. And you can also look at, and what's the field structure above that supports them. So is it an area manager? Are the sort of functional support experts, whether that's HR or different things. So it's kind of where's your key bit of leadership, and then what's the support below and above them, and how does that all work?
And clearly they're normally the most expensive roles when you take the kind of leadership structure as a chunk in any organisation. When you start to extrapolate that up.
Yes, and if you end up with leaders that spend most of their time doing general tasks, there's a risk that you've just got yourself an expensive colleague.
So it's an interesting point then. So how should each role be spending their time is one of the questions we pose in the book.
Yeah.
From experience, I suppose if you cast your mind back 20 years ago, there'd be a real desire that there's lots of things leadership, management, supervisory roles need to be there to do. Fast forward 20 years, I really struggle at times, other than probably appraisals, disciplinaries, grievances, etc. The end part of recruitment, because a lot of that's been automated or pushed through a kind of systemised process centrally that then drops out the candidates to interview. There's not much left. Opening and closing store 20 years ago was holy. You had to be a key holder, trained manager, leader. Now we've got colleagues doing it. And I'm all for that kind of devolution of responsibility. So really begs the question and challenges, if you've got lots of leaders and managers, supervisors, whatever they're kind of called, how should they be spending their time? But also a supplementary question, which would be interesting to get your view on, are the roles differentiated?
Yeah, and that's a big challenge. So I think the organisations that I see working best have a clear view on exactly what their managers are doing. So if you think kind of the unit manager or the line manager, and often they've worked to take out any extra admin. They don't do cash management every day. They've minimised all that. And by automation, digitising things, again, it can be colleagues that do some of that stuff, so it doesn't have to be managers. So actually where a manager, a leader can really make a difference is in how they coach the team. So, in a sales-orientated business, you might want them to be the sales coach. And if that's the case, you've got to give them the right tools. So have they got live sales information by colleague, so they've got it live and they can have those really good conversations with people. And how is your organisation set up so that, area managers are coaching the store managers? Because if you want your store manager, for example, to be a coach, and yet the area manager system is very checklist, have you done this, have you done that, then it's unlikely that your store leaders will be coaches, because people tend to mirror their boss's behaviour. So it is about deciding what you want them to do. And in a lot of businesses, there isn't actually that much management activity to do. all the time. You know, do you really need 3 leaders on shift? You know, so that's some of the stuff that we can look at with people. And the other piece is then how differentiated roles are. So I think historically there might have been, you know, a store leader or a unit manager. You'd have had an assistant manager and you'd have had supervisors as well. Well, again, because of the amount of management tasking that's coming down, how many of those do you need? And what happens is you find that they can all merge, so they're doing the same. So part of the studies that we do is we'll look at, if we do a role study where we're shadowing the manager and then we'll shadow an assistant manager, we'll be able to put a number on what proportion of time those roles are spending doing the same things. And if your assistant manager and store manager are doing the same thing for 80% of the time, do you need both of them? Well, you might do if your assistant manager only does that when the manager's not in and you've got long trading hours. But actually, if your assistant manager is just shadowing your store manager, do you need to do it? So for roles to work effectively, you need that differentiation. And you also have to think about career progression. So I know there's been a trend to get very flat structures, and looking at differentiation can push you that way. You then need to think, well, actually, if it's a massive jump from being a colleague to being a store manager, how do people make it? But you get a challenge with that as well, because often if people put in those roles and they say the kind of stepping stone roles, you then don't want them blocked by somebody that sits in it for 10 years because it's not a stepping stone, it's then a set place in the structure. So there's never one answer, it's never easy, and it ultimately depends what you're trying to achieve as a business, and does your leadership structure help you do that?
Yeah. And you then get down to the kind of challenges of role consistency across different sites. So again, in a unit where I might see my boss who's a field manager once a week, once a month, because that structure's been streamlined, I can pretty much default to my style. So my style might be to be out there with the team. It might be to be in the office and find stuff to do. So consistency matters for a number of reasons, doesn't it?
Yes. And it's an indication of how clear the roles are defined and how well the support works around them. So, you know, you can get big variation.
And I talked about cost. I think the bit I didn't mention was clearly national living wage for those in the UK is having a big challenge on leadership structures, because as we move the hourly rate up, and for those that sit on it and pay it, or deliberately pay above it, all it does is compress the differential between your first level of leadership supervisory. So there's lots of instances now where almost a colleague's earning maybe 50p an hour less than the first level of team leader supervisor. The team leader supervisor's salaried, so there's a conflict of, when I look at the hours I work versus the hours I'm paid, I'd be better off being a colleague. So this whole compression of the gap, and then that works to the next level up and the next level up, isn't really talked about when we see the headlines of national living wage. There's clearly the good news story for all those that benefit from the circa 10% yearly pay rises, but there is an upward pressure that lots of businesses are really struggling to face into, manage, and ultimately leads them back to reviewing the structure.
Yeah, and leadership isn't for everybody. You know, there will be a lot of people that will look at what their manager has to do and think, well, actually, for that pay differential, is that something I want to take on? And that can ultimately make it difficult to recruit managers. And it can be a challenge. Yeah.
And then in terms of quick wins, as ever, we've got quick wins in this chapter. Some bits around reviewing job specs, job descriptions. So we've all got one. Well, we should have at least. Typically, they're recruitment tools. So actually, do we have role profiles that people use day to day? There's some large organisations where they're kind of pocket guides, so it shows you what you should be doing in your role and necessarily what you shouldn't be doing. Reporting levels in the business. So, you know, is there overlap, as Sue's talked about? The two go into one. Field-based roles, where's the overlap geographically? So again, we've done work where people spend lots of time driving in those roles, but the territories haven't been redefined because people have gone and come in, and they're actually spending more time driving past each other.
We're also seeing quite a variance in field roles at the minute, where some organisations are kind of taking away the functional experts. So whether that's kind of loss prevention, risk, compliance, HR type roles that historically were often around in supporting the field manager. Some organisations have kind of taken those out. So a lot of businesses have gone to a centralised HR function. So you don't have my area HR anymore. You have support from a centralised function, for example. So there's some businesses that are going down that route and then kind of haven't always looked at what impact that has on the area manager's job or the field manager's, line manager's job. And then you've got other businesses where I've still got those roles, but actually if I'm the manager of that unit and I've got my line manager, area manager, whatever, telling me one thing, I've got an area coach that tells me something different. Again, you can have conflicts there. So none of these things are easy, and they're all people-based, but it's about how do you give people the right framework so that they can then work the best way.
Yeah. And for some organisations, it's a cost-saving thing. For others, it's a redeployment. So for every X number of leaders, I can have Y number of colleagues on the floor doing it at the right pay rate, facing customers. So there's no right or wrong answer, but certainly a big opportunity area to look at if you reviewed it. There's organisations on their probably 5th or 6th round of organisational design / leadership structure. So a bit like chapter 5, just because you've got one doesn't necessarily mean it's right now. It may have been right at the time you did it.
Yeah. And I think one of the interesting debates that often comes up within looking at organisation design is where you've got multiple outlets, is cluster management or not? And kind of businesses have kind of tended to switch between pushing it in, taking it out. I think generally it seems to work where you've got places that are within walking distance of each other. And I think there can be genuine benefits of sharing resource, sharing expertise. You know, if somebody's got a few spare hours on one site, they can send it to somewhere to help. But actually, unless they're very quick to get between each other, so somewhere like an airport is classic. You know, if you've got 4 stores in an airport, to have one manager that operates across all of them works really well. If you're trying to do it across, you know, and the places are half an hour apart, that's a different challenge, really.
Yeah. And I think there's even people considering, do I need a manager in every store as well? So again, cost, climate challenges are pushing people to that stage. So these things are all cyclical. We've seen them come and go. So if you've not had a look at your structure for a while, now is probably a good time to do it. Lots of opportunity.
And the great thing when you have role studies done, so our team come in and shadow people, is it gives you a really good evidence base to make decisions from. Because it can be difficult. You can ask questionnaires, you can have your own perceptions, but to have an evidence base that says, you know, did you know our managers are spending 20% of their time answering emails? Is that what we want them to do? One of the kind of, I guess it's the modern scourge of life that's affecting managers as well, is multiple communication channels. So when email becomes slow, they might have Yammer or some Teams chat or something like that, and actually they become slow. So people then start to use WhatsApp or text around the outside. So you can end up with these multiple communications. And we often see field managers that are getting, you know, they might clear their emails in the morning and then by lunchtime they've had another 50 messages. And it's kind of understanding some of that and why it happens can be really help businesses unlock what they're doing. And sometimes adding in extra communication channels might seem like a benefit, and there's often downsides to it.
Excellent. So we'll be back in the next episode with chapter 6. What can we stop doing to free up our people? Thank you, Sue.
Bye.